Before the outbreak of war with the Axis powers in 1941, the Soviet Union fielded the largest tank force in the world, over 20,000 vehicles. Most of these were outdated models, like the T-26 and the BT series, but the Red Army had also begun introducing far more modern designs, including the T-34 medium tank and the heavy KV series. With such a vast armoured fleet, many within the Soviet military believed that sheer numbers alone would be enough to overwhelm any opponent. They were wrong. When Axis forces launched their invasion in June 1941, they did so with highly organised and experienced troops, while the Soviet army was plagued by shortages of manpower, ammunition, fuel, and spare parts. The results were catastrophic. In the opening months of the war, Soviet armoured forces were devastated. Thousands of tanks were destroyed in combat or abandoned. The Red Army suddenly found itself facing a massive shortage of combat vehicles, a gap that had to be filled by any means necessary. Out of desperation, improvised armoured vehicles began to appear, built on any tracked or wheeled chassis that could be adapted for combat. One of the best known of these stopgap creations was the ZIS-30, a makeshift tank destroyer armed with a powerful 57mm gun. But in this video, we'll go beyond the ZIS-30 and take a closer look at some of the lesser known, more obscure improvised vehicles that entered service during those desperate days of 1941.
But first, we've got an ad. You know that idea you've had sitting in your head for months? Maybe it's a website for your new project, a productivity tool to make your life easier, or even a simple video game you've always wanted to make. With Loveable, you can bring those ideas to life in minutes, no coding required. Loveable is Europe's fastest growing AI platform that lets anyone build full stacked apps and websites just by chatting. You describe what you want and Loveable builds the foundation for you. You can tweak everything visually, change colors, move elements around, and even dive into the code yourself if you want. And it's not just for mockups either. Loveable handles the backend too, so your projects are ready to go live. If you're working with a team, you can even invite collaborators into your workspace to work on the same projects as you. Whether you're a solo creator, a startup founder, or just someone with a promising idea, Loveable gives you the power to build without limits. So check it out today. Head over to loveable.dev and use the code you see on the screen for 20% off. Turn your next idea into reality faster than you thought possible. A huge thank you to Loveable for sponsoring this video. And now, back to you, Patchbits.
We begin with two improvised armoured vehicles based on a fully tracked tractor chassis. After the devastating defeats of 1941, Soviet authorities resorted to increasingly desperate measures to slow the German advance. On July 20th, 1941, Resolution 219 was adopted, ordering the conversion of agricultural tractors into armoured fighting vehicles, armed with anti-tank guns. The Kharkiv, HTZ or KHTZ, and Stalingrad, STZ, tractor factories were tasked with carrying out this directive. After evaluating potential weapons, Soviet engineers selected the 45mm 20K gun as the main armament. For the chassis, they chose the STZ-3 fully tracked tractor. The resulting vehicle became known as the KHTZ-16, though some wartime documents refer to it as the T-16. Its overall construction was simple and straightforward. A front-mounted engine with a rear fighting compartment, both enclosed in a crude armoured superstructure made of welded and riveted steel plates. Frontal armour measured about 25mm, while the sides were just 10mm thick. To the right of the gun, a narrow slit provided the driver with limited visibility. The crew also had 3 firing ports, allowing them to use personal weapons from inside the armour. Once the prototype was complete, HTZ received a production order for 800 such vehicles. Production, however, was severely hampered. Soviet industry was in chaos, with factories evacuating eastwards ahead of the German advance. This led to shortages of armour plate, which was desperately needed for other projects, such as actual tank production. When German forces surrounded Kharkiv in October 1941, production was halted. after only 50 to 60 vehicles had been completed. STZ also contributed to KHTZ-16 production, but since its primary task was T-34 manufacturing, only about 30 vehicles were built there. Despite their limited numbers, some KHTZ-16s did see combat, though detailed records are scarce. The 14th Tank Brigade received 8 of them, while another 10 to 15 formed a battalion that took part in the defense of Poltava in September 1941, where they were quickly destroyed. Around 47 vehicles fought in the defense of Kharkiv, where they too were lost. There are reports suggesting that 16 KHTZ-16s were assigned to the 133rd Tank Brigade on the Bryansk front, fighting until late October 1941, though details of their use remain unclear. Some sources also claim a handful were deployed near Leningrad that autumn, but this is considered highly unlikely. Next, we turn to the improvised armoured vehicle simply known as the Nye. It never had an official designation, though its name, short for Nye-Spug, has been variously translated as for fright or terror tank. It was also commonly referred to as the Odessa tank. So, what exactly was this machine? Its story begins during the Siege of Odessa, which began in August 1941. At the time, Soviet defenders had only around 70 tanks to protect the city, and were in desperate need of reinforcements. With no way to bring in additional armour, workers at the January Uprising mechanical plant took matters into their own hands, and decided to build improvised fighting vehicles. For the chassis, they used the STZ tractor, as there were few other options available. The first 3 Odessa tanks were completed in just 10 days, and officially presented on August 20th. The first 2 were reportedly armed with twin DT machine guns, while a third carried a 37mm or 1.46-inch mountain gun. After being showcased in a brief propaganda demonstration, they were sent to the southern sector of the front. The crews of these vehicles were volunteers, sailors, soldiers, and even factory workers familiar with the tractors. Despite their crude design, their combat debut was surprisingly successful. When they engaged Romanian troops who, at this stage of the war, had little experience fighting tanks and lacked effective anti-tank weapons, the Odessa tank's bulky silhouette and roaring engines caused panic, forcing the enemy to retreat. According to Soviet reports, one Odessa tank was struck twice by enemy fire, but kept advancing. If true, this suggests that the enemy shells may have penetrated the armour but failed to hit any critical components, rendering the hits ineffective. Following this initial success, Soviet commanders in Odessa ordered 70 more Odessa tanks. However, the actual number produced is uncertain. Sources differ, but combat records suggest 33 to 40 were built, while only 6 to 8 can be confirmed in surviving photographs. The overall construction of the Odessa tank was extremely simple. Built on the STZ-5 tracked tractor chassis, it featured a crude box-shaped superstructure mounted on top. Its armour was entirely improvised, made from thin naval steel salvaged from ship repair yards and the local naval base. To improve protection, the plating was layered with wood and rubber, sandwiched between the steel sheets, but the total thickness only varied from about 10 to 20 millimeters, or 0.4 to 0.8 inches, which, according to factory tests, was enough to stop bullets and shrapnel. Inside, the structure was reinforced with wooden beams. The layout was divided into 2 sections, the engine compartment at the front and the crew compartment at the rear. The driver sat on the middle right, while a machine gunner was positioned opposite him on the middle left, in a small compartment of his own. Photographs show that Odessa tanks were fitted with a variety of turrets. Some used modified turrets from the T-26 M1932, adapted to mount a DT machine gun. Others had completely improvised turrets, and some likely had none at all. At least one example seems to have been equipped with a T-37A or T-38 turret. Due to severe shortages, most relied on makeshift designs, usually a square armoured box with the gun offset to one side. 3 known photographs even show Odessa tanks without turrets, possibly the result of battle damage or because they were deployed that way, armed only with a hull-mounted machine gun. The Odessa tank was also reported to have been armed with a wide variety of weapons, depending on what was available at the time of its construction. These included 1 or 2 DT machine guns, as well as, in some cases, a 37mm or 1.46-inch gun, or even a 45mm or 1.77-inch gun. While most examples of the Odessa tank were fitted only with machine guns, no known photographs confirm the existence of those armed with larger caliber guns. Nevertheless, several sources suggest that at least a few were indeed equipped with them. Some accounts also claim that a flamethrower variant existed, though it remains uncertain whether this modification was ever completed or saw combat service. Between the 30th of August and the 2nd of September, a number of Odessa tanks were officially allocated to the defenders of Odessa. The urgency of the situation meant that the majority of their crews received little to no formal training. Many were sailors, soldiers, or even factory workers pressed into service and instructed in only the basics before being sent directly into combat. The Odessa tank would see its largest and most famous action during a Soviet counterattack launched on October 2nd. This operation was spearheaded by 35 armoured vehicles, the majority of which were likely Odessa tanks. At first, they were supported by infantry units, but as the advance progressed, these foot soldiers could not keep up with the pace of the armour and fell behind. As the tanks pressed forward and engaged the besieging Axis forces, Soviet reports claimed that the attack inflicted as many as 1,000 casualties, most of them Romanian soldiers. Although this figure is almost certainly exaggerated, it nevertheless demonstrates how even simple, crudely built vehicles like the Odessa tank could achieve battlefield success under the right circumstances, especially when facing an enemy that had little experience in armoured warfare and lacked adequate anti-tank weaponry. Following the attack, the unit commander decided to withdraw, once it became clear that the supporting infantry was too far behind to provide cover. During their retreat, the Odessa tanks did manage to overrun an enemy artillery position. In doing so, they overwhelmed its crew and they managed to capture 24 guns, a small but significant success. Yet this action came at a cost. Around 7 Odessa tanks were lost during the battle, either as a result of mechanical breakdowns or from being destroyed by enemy artillery fire. Despite their contribution, the presence of the Odessa tanks was ultimately not enough to alter the outcome of the campaign. On the 16th of October, the city of Odessa fell to the Axis forces. By that point, all Odessa tanks had been lost, abandoned, or destroyed, as the Soviets evacuated the remaining defenders. Their ultimate fate remains uncertain. Most were likely scrapped in the aftermath of the battle, but at least 2 are believed to have been captured by Romanians and possibly pressed into service for training purposes. However, what became of these vehicles afterwards is unknown. Besides using fully tracked chassis, the Soviets, desperate to replace their losses, also improvised small numbers of armoured vehicles based on available trucks. After the Axis victories in 1941 left the road to Leningrad exposed, Soviet High Command turned to the Izhora plant to produce improvised armoured vehicles using the ZIS-5 truck chassis. Before the war, the Izhora plant stood as one of the Soviet Union's largest vehicle production facilities, specializing in armored cars and light tanks. With its skilled workforce and well-equipped workshops, it was ideally suited for such conversions. As a result, the plant was tasked with producing 20 improvised vehicles, an order that would soon be expanded. Besides the ZIS-5 chassis, the Gaz AA and ZIS-6 were also pressed into use for these conversions. Between August and December 1941, it is believed that as many as 100 vehicles were produced. The construction of these vehicles was deliberately kept simple. The engine and driver's compartments were fully enclosed, with 2 hatches providing access for the driver. The main armament consisted of a 45mm anti-tank gun mounted in what was essentially a partially protected truck bed, the rear of which acted as the fighting compartment for the gunner and loader. These vehicles were designated IZ, taken from the first 2 letters of the factory name. Izhora engineers also briefly experimented with an improvised armoured car based on the larger ZIS-6 truck chassis. For this variant, the rear of the truck was converted into a fully enclosed armoured compartment, and a BA-6 turret was mounted on top. The engine deck was protected with the same patterned armour used on the IZ trucks. It is believed that the BA-6 turret was chosen over the heavier T-26 turret due to weight concerns, as the BA's turret only had 9mm of armour compared to the T-26's 13mm. Only one of these ZIS-6 armoured cars is known to have been built, evidenced by a single surviving photograph. The first IZ trucks were delivered to the defenders of Leningrad in mid-July 1941. Reports indicate that they were used in the area until 1943. These vehicles were issued exclusively to the Leningrad People's Militia, though several were captured by German forces. Only one, however, is confirmed to have been used by the Wehrmacht. Some examples also fell into Finnish hands. Lastly, we take a look at a little-known improvised armoured vehicle, referred to simply as the Soviet Navy Armoured ADG. Its history is rather obscure, but it is believed that at least 3 of these vehicles were constructed by Soviet naval troops stationed at a shipyard in Tallinn, the capital of Estonia. Another theory, however, suggests that the vehicles may have originally belonged to the Estonian police, or perhaps even to the resistance movement known as the Forest Brothers, who fought against Soviet occupation. What is known is that the design was based on the Austrian ADG 6x4 truck. The conversion featured a large, lightly armoured crew compartment, along with a small turret mounting a machine gun. Unfortunately, because of the improvised nature of the vehicle, surviving documentation is scarce. Some sources claim that at least one was destroyed on the Peterhof Highway, while it is possible another managed to retreat with Red Army forces before the encirclement of Tallinn. This concludes our video on Soviet improvised combat vehicles, built as desperate stopgap measures against the advancing Axis forces. What are your thoughts on these obscure wartime projects? Do you think that they justified the time and resources invested, or were they ultimately more symbolic than they were practical? And would you like to see us cover more rare and little-known vehicles like these in future videos? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you haven't done already, we invite you to subscribe and stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. Your contributions help us create even more engaging videos. I've been your host, Will. I run the channel Patch Bits, where I do gaming videos on the game Sprocket mostly, in which I design tanks. I was really enthusiastic to do this because in one of my previous videos, I've built a tank in the game, very heavily inspired by the first tank shown in this video, the KHTZ-16. So if you'd like to see that kind of stuff, you can follow the channel link that will be in the title of this video. But that's all for now. Until next time, stay focused and stay tuned.